we're going to start now. I will introduce myself and welcome you all to our session today. My name is John Feffer. I work with the Global Just Transition Project here at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. And I am delighted that we are working with the Pacto Ecosocial on this event that is looking at labor and green colonialism, looking at the energy transition taking place around the world. Our conversation aims to hear diverse voices that make visible the demands, the challenges, the perspectives of trade union organizations in the Global South. And we have my co-facilitator, Liliana Buitrago, and I'm going to give her an opportunity to introduce herself and the Pacto Ecosocial in a moment. We also have Everline Aketch, Sub-Regional Secretary for English-Speaking Africa for the Public Services International in Uganda. We have Igor Diaz, Sintracarbón from Colombia, and we have Ibis Fernández, the Intersectorial Confederation of State Workers in Peru. I'm going to pass this over to Liliana, who's going to introduce herself and the Pacto Ecosocial, and also explain the format for our event today. Passing it to you, Liliana.
Thank you very much, John. Everybody, welcome to this space that today we have opened up with our colleagues from different parts of this Global South to talk about fair transitions from IPS and the Ecosocial Pact of the South. We're really happy to be with you all today, and you're going to, everyone who's watching this broadcast at another time, that you can also ask your questions in the different channels, and we're always going to be attentive to the interaction that's going to be generated through this dialogue beyond just this virtual space. We at the Ecosocial Pact of the South, for us, it's very important to have a discussion and that it would be very open and to talk about fair transitions that are popular, that are socio-ecological, what we call ecosocials here, those of us at the Ecosocial Pact of the South, and that are fundamentally inspired in the struggles and resistance from the different territories for us in Abya Yala, but also for some time now, we have been undergoing ongoing dialogue with our brothers and sisters from Africa, from Asia, and from the Global South, to establish a position about these transitions and what they imply and what they don't imply. We have made a manifesto of the South for a fair energy transition, and we talk about this green colonialism, which is based on the expansion, but not energy transition. And where we recently have been seeing with concern the wars, the increase in arms industry, and also the high level of investment in fossil fuels, which has really been key. And for us, it's really important to really call out these false solutions that come from international multilaterals in the corporativist push, the false solutions, and we say that there are actual real solutions. And there's alternatives here in our territories that really express actual solutions to climate change, to the crisis and loss of biodiversity, contamination, pollution, and all of the effects that are consequences of predatory civilization that are exterminating life in our territories. One way or another, we are really putting out the plurally diverse options in our live living territories. And we don't want to be a zone of sacrifice. And we understand that the energy transition is necessary, for that changing the energy matrix is not enough for a civilizatory transformation, a deep transformation to change the ways in which we relate with nature, that which is called nature, always advocating for the rights of nature, not only the rights to an anthropocentric vision and the recovery of democracy for the peoples. An example from the South is the recent referendum that was made on the Yasuni, in which the autonomies and the decisions of the people, one way or another, make demands and create a broad democratic call to keep the fossil fuels underground. And so it's really important and exciting for us today to talk about something that's so important and has to do with work relations and labor relations, and how these labor relations should be seen, addressed, worked on, and how this is being discussed in the Global South. And that is why we have these wonderful panelists today, and we would like to welcome them. So today's dynamics is going to be based on several questions that we would like to propose here in this broad space, to recognize a little bit about how is the fair green transitions being addressed in the different labor organizations and organizations that we're going to be discussing, and a little bit to also look at this strategy that's going to be needed, or that's being done in these organizations, to dispute fair transitions. And so the concept of fair and just transitions comes from the 1970s, and it's something that has put in this discursive basis, especially from the global north. And when we talk about nuclear energy, proliferation of new energy technologies, and proposals related to oil and gas industry, which are put here on the table to talk about the need for workers to be at the focus and at the center of these transitions. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Thank you, Liliana. So as Liliana explained, we're going to ask the panelists 2 questions and give them a short period to answer these questions. The first question is, how does your organization, how does your trade union position itself in the face of this corporate green transition and energy colonialism? And here, please let us know some of the pressures that you're experiencing, the pressures that workers are experiencing in your country as a result of these transitions. I'd like to start with Ibis, if that's possible, and then we'll turn to Felipe, and then Igor, and then Everline. So Ibis, por favor.
From Peru, hello to everyone. Thank you for the invitation. For me, it's such an honor to be here on this panel, and especially talking about such an important issue for the countries of the South. So as to the question, what I would like to do is to make a small introduction, saying that another thing that's in dispute right now is a new narrative, because we have been talking about energy transitions that are fair, that are just, climate change, and based on green colonialism. And to that effect, in Peru, that's something that we've seen in unions, workers, and people in that work in the extractive sector, which is a very it's precarious sector. There's a lot of exploitation, and the large multinational companies are always trying to avoid complying with the rights of workers. Trouble hearing her. as a union as one of the important points in the labor agenda. So we obviously are building a narrative to generate political awareness among workers. Because what's being disputed here is a new narrative. And for us, both from the National Confederation of Workers of Peru and also of the CGTP, which is the majority organization, we have to really basically generate a discussion and debate on the ideas, because we've seen this hegemonical and neoliberal model that in our country, in Peru, this is a mining country. And that's not really true. We do have a lot of mining resources, as like we see like lithium right now, but we're also a country that can develop agriculture and also its industries, and to give added value to our natural resources and stop being what we have been condemned to be by the global north, which is to be the backyard and to become merely raw material exporters with no added value. And so from what we've been doing here is incorporating into our debates about what kind of a country do we actually want? What's the vision for our country? How do we get out of this economic crisis? And that we're now in this big recession. What do we do? Because the boom that Peru lived, the mining boom, is finished. The pandemic evidence, the precarization, and unfortunately, a country that was growing, they never redistributed wealth. They did not, the state didn't deal with it. They didn't manage its resources, and they took most of the pie. All of the multinational countries, like all companies, like always, and the large capitals, and they did not address the essential rights and investing in health, in education, and also to invest in people and workers so that they would actually have a dignified work. But we do recognize that in this issue, we need to debate it to see what it really means to us, what we've been talking about now, this lithium boom, for example. Because why is lithium, in fashion right now? What would it mean that the poorest zones of our country, where we see the lithium deposits, one is in Cusco, to become what would happen if they're going to go in and actually produce that lithium? What is that going to mean for us? I would stay here. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Ibis. We've talked about this in Latin America, specifically when it has to do with the new materials, with critical materials, the most important. So it would be great if we could make a dialogue. And I would like if Everline could tell us about their perspective, their organization, and mostly about how from this organization do they face this position, this green colonialism's position.
Are you there?
Well, in the meantime, while we're waiting Everline, we will also talk about in Latin America. So today, Felipe Diaz and Heather from Colombia with a government that is has lots of hope for many of the organizations, and it has opened the debate for the possibilities of transitions in this country. So, Igor, welcome to this space, and could you please tell us a bit more about the organization that you're trying to help people to get into the transitions of the corporation? Could you tell us what is the scenario right now for these organizations? Hello, Liliana, can you hear me? Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation for this syndicate of the carbon industry in Colombia. This is a very important step, and it is crucial for us. It is very important, this topic, because it's been quite a long time that we've had this government, and while looking about the perspective of the transitional topic, our region, to give you some more context, has a lot of carbon development. Like 45% of the internal product depends on this activity. And not directly, but also indirectly, because many people of these communities have to survive with this production and with this work of the carbon mineral. And we would like to talk about the transitions in the energy transitions in our department, because it's very complex, and this complexity is given because our department is very poor, and we have to do to short term. We have to find another kind of production, because this is a main topic in the survival of this society. So it's been quite a long time since we've been talking about this, because we want to inform about legally the contract that this multinational minery, it was bought not so long ago, and up to 2035 they have a contract with the government. And we're talking, I'd like to talk about the transitions and explain why, because there's been kind of 3 mining companies, and contrary to the major belief, they have a project and up until 2035. And this project works with the workers and the communities, and they try to implement many other environmental passive. And there's a thing going with the legislation in Colombia. And this is an act against the workers and against the communities, because this is his economic strategy as a multinational company. Because in the middle of the pandemic and post-pandemic, the government of Colombia tried to close the mining place for 18 months. And finally, Colombia allowed this. So we tried to stop this, because more than 2,000 workers were given short notice and they lost their jobs. And this generated a social chaos because they tried to make more profit of the mining company, but they fired a lot of people. So what did they decided to do? They decided to leave the department and try to buy the 66% of the shareholders. And this decision, we assume that there is a great the production is very short. So they all have all this infrastructure and all this business, and they were the owners of the 33% of this company, and they ended up buying the 66%. And what does it mean? We have a compromise. We have this change that's been coming for quite a long time. And this wasn't good as an enterprise, because with this 100% buying, the production was all to the war of the Ukraine and Russia. In the moment of the pandemic, the price was about $40, and 1.5 years later, it was more than 100. What happened to this enterprise? What happens when they tried to make adjustments? The shifts were changed, the payments as well, and in part of this, in the reality in these communities and these workers is what they're living now. And I give you this short context just to tell you what is happening today. This is an opportunity. This is a historic opportunity, because not only for Colombia but for the whole world. We definitely have to have an energetic transition. We have to stop extractivism and petroleum. But for that, we have to look at other productive perspectives, like, for example, the industries of other sectors in society, and to make them better, to change the ecosystems in a better way, and to stop the contamination. Because finally, we have to be as productive as we were before, but being just with the climate, just with the communities. And this is one of the topics that we are most worried about, because we have to give immediate solutions. And how do we allow this transition, but that it comes to be very friendly with the environment? So in that topic and in the labor stuff, just to give you an example, in the mining company where I worked, there had 10,000 workers, and more than the half of them are 35 years old, and they've been working for 15 years with us. And an adjustment will be traumatic for them, because in 10 years, probably they won't have any kind of payment or retirement payment. And the production will not be satisfactory for the company, basically for the labor conditions as of today. And the workers, I mean, all the benefits that they have won't be enough. And from another perspective, I just want to tell you, this is what's happening in Colombia. Extractivism has never been just, has never been fair. And it's been all the time unjust. Many governments and multinational governments presented this as the opportunity, but it was, on the contrary, a very bad idea. And Colombia has right now they don't have access to the mining companies. When it comes to cattle and agriculture, in these regions were more positive in the sense of labor possibilities. People could work in these companies, but not in the mining company. So how long we have been with this, how much time has passed for minery to become the only source of work. In Sintracarbón, we think that the world is moving into that sense, moving to the carbon stuff, which is our labor sector. So we have to be more propositive. Okay, now with the government, the new position that our government has, how do we support other organizations? The mission of our workers is to work in these regions and to give the national government another proposal as in sort of with the three syndicates, energy and carbon, the Cipame, which is an integrated center of three syndicates that gives information, and this will allow us to give the national government a public policy that is clear and that I don't know how much time do I have, but just to finish, I'd like to the situation in Colombia. I'd like to tell you about this. There are a lot of multinational companies interested in extractivism, and if they can't do that, they just want to leave the country and affect all the workers. So all of this makes the discussion kind of difficult, but we'd like to think that we can actually do this. And with this energy, with the force that we have with the workers, we will actually get to this topic. And we will listen to each other. We will listen to the government as well. And in the time that we actually need it to create a new policy regarding energetic transitions. And I would like to stop right here because I'd like other people to speak. And of course, if you have any questions or anything, or if you would like to give or ask for more information, of course, I'll be here. And in the COP28, in the second week, we're going to be working with the syndicates and with the many different organizations in Latin America and many other syndicates in a global state to see if this global syndicalism and us as well, we begin to discuss the topics of these energetic transitions. And this is our perspective. I would like to stop right here, and thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Igor. That was very helpful perspective from Colombia. I'd like to now turn to Everline Aketch. And Everline is, as I introduced her before, Sub-Regional Secretary for English-Speaking Africa with the Public Services International. And thank you so much, Everline, for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you to answer that first question about how this is impacting workers in your country and in your region.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. I just want to join the previous speakers in terms of discussing the challenges of achieving just transition, especially from the workers' perspective. One of the things that we should also actually note, just as my former colleagues have noted, is the current issue of just transition is being led by multinational corporations, whom we know definitely their major interest is actually profit maximization. So even if you talk about the tenets of justice, one of them is that the energy itself should not only be affordable, but it should also be accessible and quality in itself. However, the current trend we see, even as the developed countries and the OECD are pushing for green structural program, is that the just transition, which should be led by the government, is currently being overtaken by the multinational corporations. We know that if everybody is going to benefit from the just transition, especially in terms of clean energy, and maybe let me just give a background to some of the few countries. We know that Africa in itself contributes less than 4% towards the current global carbon emission. So actually we're the least polluters in the whole globe. However, we pay the highest price. It should also be noted that if you look at the energy access, especially clean energy across the continent, we have more than 600 million people who do not have access to clean energy. Talk about electricity. And you find that close to about 900 million women actually still using, fire, what we refer to as biomass fuel to be able to undertake their cooking. Now, if you're talking about a just transition which will ensure clean energy, then you should not also remove the tenets of issues of access, affordability, and also equity in terms of this just transition. Our biggest challenge as Public Services International is that the nations have never learned from the past. We are seeing the neoliberal policies still driving the agenda of just transition, which is quite unfair to the many of developing countries, just as submitted by the previous speakers. And one of the greatest worry that we have, especially when it comes to green structural program and green financing, is that it's taking the model of structural adjustment programs of the 1980s and the 1990s. One good example that I want to highlight is the one for South Africa. Then I can come to Kenya, because some of these are the countries that are greatly affected by the current clamor towards a just transition. Now, if you look at South Africa, I know they need something about over 200 million US dollars to be able to achieve a just transition within their coal sector. We know that the number of workers employed within the mining sector of South Africa, but then when they decided to show interest from benefiting, in terms of benefiting from the fund which was provided, all of a sudden the supply of electricity in that country became something else, became so erratic, just to show that certain times the governments are not doing a good work. It has more of a sabotage for their neoliberal policies to force South African government to privatize that sector. Now, if you're going to achieve a just transition, we still insist as Public Service International that the governments must take the forefront in terms of providing the policy framework, in terms of deciding how to generate the money to ensure a just transition, which is going to ensure all the members of the community, including workers, access clean energy. Now, let me go back to the issue of what is the impact, especially from the workers' perspective. First of all, you should actually appreciate that workers are not being adequately engaged in these discussions of just transition. All of us know that the word of just transition was originally coined by the workers, but then as the conversation went on, this terminology was hijacked by the multinational corporations, and the workers' active participation in terms of even defining how to move in the blueprint is absent. What we all know currently, there's no clear blueprint in terms of how, for instance, Africa or the sub-Saharan Africa is going to be able to achieve this just transition. And without the contribution of the workers who provide the daily technology and the daily tech know-how to help you to clearly define how will you get out of it, it is naturally going to be a just transition that you really need as sub-Saharan Africa, but also as the Global South, as already submitted. One of the issues that still worries a number of workers, especially the ones who are going to migrate from either coal or fossil fuel to clean energy, where there are alternative jobs. Because we keep on saying, okay, the just transition will be able to provide a number of alternative jobs, but the workers' clear indication in terms of these are the, the certainty when it comes to jobs you're going to expect is still not there. So eventually, the non-engagement and involvement of workers in this entire process is proving to be disruptive in its own self. Because there's disruption, you're going to lose your job, but somebody is not telling you how you're going to actually achieve those additional jobs that you keep on saying is going to be provided through a just transition. But the reason why this is not clear is because there's lack of involvement and formal representation of workers and other users and elected officials on the board of directors, or who are actually in the board of some of these, let's talk about organizations that are planning issues of just transition. Now, we also note that when it comes to the workers, and I want to speak in terms of South Africa, many of them don't understand what a just transition is going to be all about. A government comes in and says, you know what, in the next 5 or 6 years, we're going to actually close some of your mining sector. And you're not even explaining to them, why are you really closing the mining sector? What are the provisions you've actually put in place to be able to absorb these workers who are going to lose their jobs? And one of the key challenges that I also want to highlight, just as my former colleagues have noted, whereas Africa is one of the richest continents in terms of the minerals that you need to ensure or to achieve a just transition, we are still being forced to export raw materials. So if you're going to export your raw materials for energy, for just transition, that means even the revenue sources that could have actually been used to ensure public provision is still going to be minimal. Because we know the current architecture of the globe is that there's issues of intellectual property rights, where most of the sub-Saharan Africans are not allowed to replicate some of these energies to do value addition on their own material. So eventually, whichever way we take it in terms of a just transition, you find that the workers are still disadvantaged. For the ones who are going to lose their jobs, a disadvantage. In terms of creating alternative jobs, it is not very clear. And so this still becomes a gray area. We really want and still advocate for a just transition, but a just transition where workers are not involved, and especially one which is led by neoliberal organizations and multinational corporations, will never achieve a just transition. Let's always not forget, sometimes we forget that the tenets of justice is that every time there's inequality in the society, as communities, well, the communities will always be required to pay more to access clean energy. So that is not justice at all. But also at the same time, if we do not ensure that this just transition is publicly led, we are going to have increased gender inequality, especially within Africa, where a majority of women still have to go and use firewood, biomass as one source of their cooking, which is quite unfortunate. So as workers within the public sector, we want a just transition, but that one which is led by the public, by the governments. Because if we continue the same narrative, where the neoliberal guys are actually pushing the agenda, then even the policy space for the government to be able to regulate in the interest of the public is already going to be lost. And this is some of our arguments. Our practical argument is based on what we've actually seen with structural adjustment program. When the structural adjustment program came that forced many of our countries, including Uganda, to privatize the energy sector, many workers lost their jobs. But quite unfortunate is that the cost of energy became exorbitant. There was actually almost threefold increase in terms of the energy price after privatization. We're seeing this push for privatization, even as we talk about clean energy in Kenya. For instance, Kenya's energy mix, over 70% of it is actually clean energy. But then IMF and also World Bank are forcing them to privatize this sector. Now, to benefit from the just transition kitty or the climate kitty or the green financing, Kenyan government is being told you must first of all plant trees before you are able to actually access financing from IMF for just transition. I think that is not being fair. If you're going to have and achieve a global just transition, there should be a clear level playing field. And the context of the developing countries, both in the global south, that includes also Africa, should be provided the policy space to determine how they want the trajectory of the just transition to take place. Because we have different levels and stages of development. If we expect that Africa is going to transition at the same rate as Europe, that is not being realistic. Because in terms of the technology itself, in terms of the infrastructure itself, the monies that are required are still beyond what our governments are able to achieve. We know that the other day, COP28 announced the issues of damage and loss, but it's paltry because If you're causing the greatest damage in terms of climate change in Africa, but you're giving about 100 million towards damage and loss, you've not helped in anything. So sometimes when you have these dynamics of our conversation, it actually becomes challenging that there's no honesty in all this paradigm in terms of how we want to achieve a just transition, which is for the people, for the workers, and not few multinational corporations. That is the biggest contention. Anytime the corporations hijack a process that is meant to help the entire community, we lose it. We know it. Workers suffer, the community actually suffer. So we still want to push that the best way for just transition is a public pathway, as opposed to these things of JPs. The JPs are not going to take us anywhere in terms of just transition. We are going to see job losses. We know that multinational corporations do not respect the trade union rights. They never provide job security. They never provide decent works, and also even an occupational health and safety environment that meets the standard that normally you expect from the public sector. So that is our submission, especially from the Public Services International perspective. Thank you.
The Center for Development to also talk about these effects that Everline was mentioning, which has to do with what are exactly the adjustments that they are evaluating that need to be made for the transition in the framework of the conditions for workers in Colombia. And what are the conditions where this transition is being proposed in the different analyses that are being done? And what would this mean to give this protagonism to the public sector, like everyone says, and what's going on with the debate in Colombia? Felipe, go ahead. Morning. I'm speaking to you here from Colombia. Here at Cipame, what we've been identifying is that inevitably there's a before and an after once the Petro government arrived. This is a progressive government. For the first time, they want to come in to have dialogue with the actors that have historically been displaced and ignored. And by previous administrations, there was always a very close relationship with the business class. And the truth of the matter is that before the Petro government, the awarding of all the different wind and solar projects that were going to come in to replace fossil fuels were basically given to large multinational companies. Today, there are 19 different projects at a large scale, and that's like 80% belong to our multinational companies. So is it the current administration's responsibility? No, those contracts had already been prepared by the last administration. And so the current administration, they have proposed is to gain ground, for the state to gain ground by retaking public assets. And so that's something that, neoliberalism had always had, which always had a very aggressive position by the establishment, businesses, and also, global geopolitics. Because unfortunately, right now that they're at COP28, we've got to really look and see that 1.8 degrees Celsius was the increase. 1.1% an increase of fossil fuels. And that in the frame of what we're talking about of climate change. And add to that, we're in an arms race, both in the Gaza Strip and in Ukraine, which really show us that we're working under a profit basis, because the war machinery is what makes the world run. And the truth of the matter is that people are saying now that the studies say that in the next 7 years, we are going to get to that 1.5 degrees Celsius that we did not ever want to see an increase in the world temperature. And so we're always in a worse and worse situation. And we're going against the rights of nature, the rights of the communities, and the rights, social rights and economic rights of all nations. And when the Petro administration came in to propose sovereignty, because it's the Ministry of Mines and Energy, they're proposing sovereignty from also the environmental secretariat to talk about opening up a new mining company that would be able to produce and explore and also sell ore during this transition, because the proposal here is that we need a transition, but we need to extract the ore in a proportional way and in a way that guarantees the renewable energy industry in Colombia. And so that really goes against the neoliberal model, because what they're proposing is a public company. So there's a bill on the table that's called the New Mining Bill. And in this bill, we have an inauguration and the creation of a company that's going to be called Eco Minerales. This same logic is what is going to be proposed in the oil and gas sector. Here, the largest oil company is Ecopetrol, which is owned by the government. And what they want is Ecopetrol to have a new business unit when it comes to new renewable energies. And so what that means is that the public sector is going to start exercising governance, and they're going to start making demands to those who are going to be receiving the profits from the energy transition. And so the research center and the workers have found a communication that they never saw before in the government. And on the other hand, the ministries that are leading the transition are calling to us to help them with information, with research, knowing the needs of the workers and that dialogue. And thanks to this communication that we've never seen before, what we're seeing for the first time is opening the doors to controlling green extractivism, because the idea here is that a green extractivism is not going to be in the hands of mining companies, but rather that not only in the country that the country produce in large scale, but also in medium scale and small scale. But also what we have is that, really they're trying to do a reindustrialization. And when we talk about a sovereign project in a peripheral country like ours, there's always this position. And when you want to talk about sovereignty, both business people and multinational companies and multilateral organizations, any initiative of making an asset public is something that is called a neoliberal, as it's some sort. And so following several decisions that have been made by the government to stop extracting once the licenses are run out in 2023, to not renew them. And so, large capital, and we'll say that those are reasons to bring an imbalance to the economy. And right now, yes, there is an imbalance, because despite the fact that we're not really an oil country, we do export oil, but not in large amounts, and we're very dependent on it. And so if we're so dependent, like fiscally speaking, where are we going to get the resources to be able to finance the energy transition? And that's where we have a large paradox, which is that in that relationship between the periphery and the center, and countries that are underdeveloped and developed countries, we are only finding large international funds, which is, really the large capitals. And so right now, the Inter-American Development Bank just approved a $70 million fund. The question is, in exchange for what are we going to be receiving that money? In exchange for what are we going to be receiving a fund to finance our renewable energy? Because unfortunately, large multinational countries that are diversifying themselves for fuel and extractivism, what they're doing is diversifying their business. And what they're doing is really going into the renewable energy industry. And they don't want an underdeveloped country like Colombia to have us take sovereign decisions where they make their own industry, where there's a transfer of technology. And so really what we're doing is going to the national government and trying to dialogue with them and contribute ideas when it comes to workers. Thank you very much, Felipe. It's been really interesting this first round to really address these perspectives in which the organizations and the different contexts are right now and being discussed, the transitions, fair transitions for the workers. And there are some key issues that you have mentioned, which really lead me to do the next question that we want to ask you, which is what who can be added into this? What kind of partnerships are needed? Who do we need to be partnering with, especially in Colombia? We talk about, the government, different organizations, to ask, in addition to the intersectoriality, which obviously is necessary, but to see where the different unions really make an alliance, and to really ask, because as Igor said, mining and energy policies for fairer transitions in Colombia is something that's also being proposed for a gender inclusion. Everline also talked about the fact that how women have to play a fundamental role when it comes to that transition, thinking that they are those who really sustain and production.
And well, we would like you to tell us which are the alliances that are being threaded, and not only from the point of view of intersection, but also socially, to understand. Understanding that the energetic justice has also to do with the social justice and gender, ethnic, and racial justice.
Yeah, first of all, when it comes to South Africa, we have comrades, because PS has got affiliates in South Africa, and we have NUMSA, which is the main union that is in charge of energy and the mineral sector in that country. But then they've also been able to engage with a number of organizations, civil society organizations, that may deal with the communities to see what is going to be the impact of the just transition, including South Africa subscribing itself to the current green financing, which is a conditionality for privatization. So we believe that when people come together, the civil society, trade unions, that is where our power actually lies. And the discussion has continued within the framework of South Africa. I know there's been a number of engagement with the current government in terms of the impact of the expected transition, including the finance they're supposed to receive after meeting all the conditionalities set by IMF and World Bank, the ones who are in charge of that funding. Now, when it comes to Uganda, we have organizations like Akina Mama of Africa and Siatini. Akina Mama of Africa is mainly a feminist organization that mainly looks at the impacts of some of the policies on women, including issues of energy transition. Now, interesting enough, Uganda's energy mix currently, 98% of it is simply clean energy, hydro power. However, despite it having the highest energy mix when it comes to clean energy, we still have only 20% of the households connected to the power grid. So that shows you over 80% do not have access to this clean energy. So that still becomes a big challenge. But then the engagement with civil societies and some of the feminism organization is very critical in terms of amplifying the voices, not only of the women, but the community, but also showing the implication of neoliberal policies towards issues of access, equality, the quality of the type of energy we want. We've also worked with a number of organizations. I've talked about Siatini, I've talked about Akina Mama of Africa, but we also have an umbrella which talks about public service provision, reclaiming public services within Africa itself, which really looks at issues of the policies that we're going to engage in must be publicly and governmentally driven, as opposed to corporates taking charge of our just transition. So we're still going to continue engaging in this, because we believe there's actually a lot of power when the union comes together with other civil society organizations to be able to champion a just transition, which is through public pathway as opposed to privatization.
Thank you, Everline. That was very helpful. We're going to ask the same question of our other three panelists. I'd like to start with Ibis, if you are with us.
I would like to point out about the topic of transitions and a just politic and this change in the paradigms. This energetic transition that has to be fair as well won't be inside this system. In Peru, we have understood and we have thought about this, of the crisis of the neoliberal state, that we are a society that is, we export natural resources without any added value. And that is why with the commercial agreements conditionate the production. In this case, for example, we have been taking initiatives since in 2014, because in Peru, in the COP 2020 and the climate change and everything that we know, we have incorporated in the social agenda of the working class, the indigenous movement and the original peoples. We are a very diverse country, but we realized that we had to do a pact. We have to do an alliance against this uncivilized processes. And this is a debate that's been going on for very long years. And in our agenda, and with this transition, the new transitions, that has to be fair, that unfortunately, as I said at the very beginning, this narrative has been taken advantage of by the capitalism. And these concepts become euphemistic. And this agenda that we have been working on, and unfortunately was made during the pandemic, we are now transforming it. And it has to be against the multinational companies that come from other countries. And we have to redefine the concept of energetic transition that is fair. And this has been all made in between the hegemonic ambientalist concepts. And we have been debating all of this because this has to do with the subject, the social subject of change. Our countries cannot be forced to be the resources of the North and Europe's. So we cannot accept all of this because this is all a new colonialism, right? So what to do in this sense? We have been participating not long ago in Colombia, Bogota. We have been sharing opinions and comments, and we have been seeing the all of this. And as you know, Peru has been on a political crisis for a very long time, and even nowadays, even today, tomorrow you're probably going to see a lot of people manifesting in the streets. So this activity has been criminalized, but we are working and we are trying to change this, because this is a very long and slow process. But the civil society has to have this class conscience, because we, as I said a long time ago, like ecology and social justice is like working on your garden. It has to do with this paradigm with this patriarchal system, but also has to do with countries like especially Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, and all the countries in the Latin region. We do not contaminate as much as other countries, but they are very vulnerable as well. So we have to learn from all the advancements that have been going on from brothers and sisters of the same movement, of the syndical movement of Ecuador, Bolivia, and all the Latin American countries. And we are just building up this line with multiple actors, with multiple participants. This unity has to be very wide. And we have a lot of details and in the field of syndicalism, and even with workers in the mining companies, and for example in the indigenous people. We're a very diverse country that even the conservationist forces are trying to polarize the reactions of many regions. There's always a political system here in Lima, and all these powers, there's supposed to be synergy. We are organized in a national level, so we have to be united. So this is the topic of the transition. It has to be, and that also has to do with sovereignty. So these models of the has to be debated in the national agendas. It has to be constituted into public policies, especially here in Peru, because we are fighting for a new project, for the new constitution that questions the role of the state in terms of the money. Because when there is multinational companies, there's pillage, looting, and the country, the peoples get contaminated, get impoverished, and then they leave. And the peoples are the ones that stay in this country. So I think this debate in between brothers and sisters is very important to learn the lessons and to show what's the thing that we're doing right now. We have the volition, and the workers, we have understood that we cannot do this alone. So what we are convinced about is that we have to have unity, social, political, and ecological, feminist unity, just to build up a roadmap that we have been talking about a few years ago. Thank you.
Gracias, Ibis. Tenemos una pregunta.
Thank you very much, Ibis.
Para
We have a question for Igor and Felipe. I'd like to know what's the position of Felipe and Igor about the international missions like Terra Justa that look to renegotiate the free market negotiations, because they have been working with a lot of companies, international companies,
que suelen inclinarse a proteger los intereses de los inversores.
and they try to basically protect the interest and
Los casos de
of the companies.
Igor y Eco, los contra de la expansión,
Also as well with the
párrafo desactivando efectivamente. Y bueno, les copia el enlace para compartir la iniciativa
And there is a link here to know about this situation. And given that this question is like some sort of analysis in the we would also like to know a little bit about the your position of Colombia. There's a treaty of non-proliferation of oil fuels. So we would like to know what is your position against this situation that is going on in other countries, and what is the impact that this will generate in the dynamics of these things that we have been talking right now in this reunion. So would you like to please tell us what will be your answer to this question that Alejandro is asking? And of course, any final considerations that you would like to also talk about. Well, talking about the challenges that this government has faced, especially in Latin America, every government that tries to be that puts its emphasis into sovereignty is sabotaged, either internal or external, and the cases has been very, very clear. In Uruguay and Brazil, these countries wanted to be sovereign. They try to not depend on other countries, specifically the United States, but they were literally squashed. These countries were opposed to the expansionist model of the United States. So we were seeing with this reality is and with this government is that we're trying to disentangle all the problems that were created with all of these problems before. These treaties have effectively finished with multinationals that when they go against the sovereignty, when they basically the governments, when they go against the interests of these companies, they are accused of being against the whole country. And in the logic of international commerce, this is not good. Right now, I do not know the initiatives that are going on. We have to negotiate the treaties again. But I think this is a challenge that is also added to the situation. Because inevitably, when a multinational company from the contract position has the freedom to basically go against all the ecological treaties, where there are no jurisdiction.
The worst thing is that when you leave behind an environmental liability or a social liability, in addition to that, we have to pay them because they feel or they appeal to them saying that we're going against their business. And so unavoidably, that issue is something that has to be addressed in a more profound fashion. And that's one of the many problems that we are finding here. So I just would say add one more thing to what we're saying here, which is that just not long ago, we had a workshop. And in that workshop, we talked about the issue of negotiation with the ELN. So just to illustrate a little bit to our international colleagues, the ELN warriors, is trying to create a sovereignty over oil and gas. And one of the questions that we asked in that workshop was how and what is the position of this kind of a group, a guerrilla group that is defending sovereignty. So what do they think about that? Do they agree in making a reconversion and going to a clean energy matrix, or do they want to keep producing oil and gas as long as it's a sovereign nation? We don't know that. And so what happened in Colombia is that there's a subset that also, that another issue that has to do with peace that we're trying to, we tried to do negotiations with the FARC, which they were trying to reivindicate their land. And now there's this other issue, which is the new escalation of violence in this guerrilla group of the ELN that has really, it's become really difficult to negotiate with them. And so added to that dependency and impunity that we have, which is something that we've seen with the different multinational companies. We also see war that are another element that makes it difficult to make equitable transitions that are associated here in the territories, because inevitably we can have a major conflict in which the armed actors, whether because of politicians, paramilitaries, or guerrillas, oftentimes end up taking over those resources, and that really complicates the equity when it comes to an energy transition. Yeah. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So 2 opinions that I have. The first thing is that somebody had presented first in the first question about who could we work with strategically. I think it's really important to think not only about what's going on in Colombia, but who could we do it with internationally. And so that's something that we've been working on. And so we have a clear opinion. And I think the class warfare that we have going on between workers and owners is not something that's going to change with the energy transition, because work capital is always going to be there and they will change. It's going to be strategic and going to be molded toward the energy matrix or clean energy. And that's something that we're going to see in the future. And so that fight is not going to change. And that's why we have considered that the strategic partnerships are really important for the fight, because there is, on a global level in Europe, Spain, Germany, for which this possibility potentially it could be a very important ingredient for what's going to happen in Colombia. But I mean, similarly in Latin America, Peru, that with our neighboring countries, we really have to come together in that fight and help each other. We can't avoid that responsibility, and so we are always proposing a discourse, which is that that's not going to happen, because necessarily world is going in that direction and it's going to take us there whether we like it or not. So what we have to see is what we can do to really do it under better conditions, because when we talk about extractivism, for example, in Colombia, and we're very ignorant as to how the extractivist process works, what was the structural process going to look like, and then we can start to really understand and learn the way to go. And everything that's happening really takes us to have a lot of information that's going to help us to really confront the model, to find justice from the workers. And I think that's the other thing is that when we look at trade agreements, so our president, who we support and we validate, I have opinions about certain issues that have to do with the transition in the face of something that's really important. And when we talk about a public policy, so we've been in Colombia for 1.5 years, and now we are going to have a diagnosis in the audience and listening to each other. And that's something that we see that's happening. Now we're going to go into the practice and to find something tangible to say that there really is an administration that's interpreting the reality that communities and workers live, which is what we're seeing. And that is what we are looking at as workers. And so we think that part of justice in this transition process has to do with the involvement of unions, of everybody who's in the unions, and the workers, and also the communities of those of us who are in the region. And we have really, for a long time now, been looking at the impact of coal mining. But now if we go back to the issue of the second question that Liliana made, which was that, you know, we necessarily need to have, we need an administration that's really going to interpret everything that has to do with free trade agreements. So we really face these free trade agreements in the state of Colombia with the other governments, because something that has harmed the people and something that has really hurt the country and things that affected the national economy. But today, with the president, we have these effects that we've seen from the free trade agreements, which really favor international capital more than the nation in and of itself. And so in that context, we believe that it becomes necessary to really review those free trade agreements with the United States and with other countries that definitely really caused social problems in Colombia, like the unions. And in Colombia, what I've said is that if the possibility of having a renegotiation that will allow for better conditions when it comes to social issues in the country, that would be great. Otherwise, we're going to keep taking on that model, and this model, which in which really the right-wing governments in our country and in all of Latin America have really made it possible for, you know, you just fill the coffers of these different, you know, multinational companies more than anything else. And so we work to provide those multinational companies with more and more money, while our personal situations get worse and worse. And so we are, you know, looking at a model that's affecting a country. And if there's an opportunity to have a renegotiation that's going to improve those conditions, then we really have to look at that perspective and see how we can evolve. And so I think that part of the social situation in Colombia, and I'm being very self-critical here, is that we've seen a lot of unionism, which has gone to a certain point. I mean, I want to say that we keep reacting to what's happening, but we also, and unions need to really act in Colombia and really go and look at the reality of what's happening in the world. And we can also, you know, mobilize ourselves and see how we can, you know, stop trying to hurt the workers. And we want to keep being, you know, proposing things. And we want to be a fundamental part of this because we believe that justice needs to begin there. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor, very much. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists. We wish we had more time to follow up with other questions and questions from the audience, but clearly 3 takeaways from our session today: the importance of the role of the public sector in this process of a transition, the importance of having a place at the table for workers, for unions, for communities affected, a place at the table in these discussions over the transition, and the importance of strategic partnerships, obviously, between unions, across sectors, and as importantly, across borders as well. And this has been, of course, an example of cross-border discussion and solidarity. I want to thank my co-facilitator, Liliana Buitrago from the Pacto Ecosocial. This has been an event sponsored by the Pacto and the Institute for Policy Studies. And I very much also want to thank our hardworking interpreters who have done a fabulous job of facilitating this cross-border communication. We will be following up with by posting this video, as well as preparing a report that we will send to people. I encourage you all to follow the work of our Global Just Transition Project and the Pacto Ecosocial. We've included the links to those organizations in the chat. And I, again, would like to thank you all for joining us today in this conversation. Goodbye.